Her name was Caroline Whitmore, and at 72, she had nearly convinced herself that the most vivid chapters of her life had already been written. She lived in a quiet home tucked into the hills of Sonoma Valley, a house she and her late husband Gerald had built together more than 4 decades ago, stone by stone, laugh by laugh. The floors still creaked in places where their sons had raced toy trucks. The kitchen still held that same chipped coffee cup she used every morning. There were no dramatic days anymore. Caroline liked it that way, or so she told herself. But everything began to shift on a Thursday evening, just after sunset. She had been painting again, something she'd stopped doing for over 20 years. After Gerald passed away, she couldn't bear the silence of the brush. But that night, something had tugged at her. Maybe the way the orange light melted across the floorboards, or the way the breeze curled through the curtains like an invitation. She painted barefoot, the house hushed. A soft silk robe clung to her shoulders as she moved between canvas and palette, letting the color speak. Her movements were fluid, thoughtful. She felt younger, unafraid of being seen. Which is why, when she noticed the faint rustle from the garden gate, she didn't cover herself. Not immediately. It wasn't until she turned fully toward the window that she saw him. Tom, the gardener's son. He was in his early 40s, there to trim the overgrown hedges he'd been neglecting. He wasn't leering, not at all. In fact, he looked away the moment he noticed her silhouette through the glass. But the moment froze in time, stretched across the room like the fading sunlight. She stepped back instinctively, tying the robe a little tighter. Her heart didn't race with shame. It pulsed with something deeper, older, and long forgotten. Curiosity. The next morning, she brewed tea and sat on the porch. She expected Tom to avoid her gaze, maybe even skip his weekly rounds altogether. But when he arrived, he waved, calm, polite, as if nothing had happened. As if it had been nothing. Yet Caroline couldn't stop replaying that moment. The gaze, the silence, the heat. It wasn't about Tom. It was about herself. What had that moment awakened? Over the following days, Caroline began to notice things. How often she avoided mirrors, how rarely she allowed herself softness or spontaneity. There had been rules she had placed around her identity for decades. Don't dress like that, don't walk like that, don't laugh too loud, don't be seen. She had built a home out of modesty and grief. But now the walls felt thinner. She started changing how she dressed. Nothing scandalous, just little things. A silk scarf, a lower neckline, perfume she hadn't worn in years. She opened old sketchbooks, reread journals from her 30s, and even called her old college roommate just to say, "Remember when we danced barefoot in Italy?" Caroline wasn't falling in love with anyone. She was falling back into herself. One afternoon, she took a walk through the vineyards behind her home, wearing a simple sundress and wide-brimmed hat. The breeze curled through her silver hair, and she smiled at nothing in particular. A young couple passed her on the trail, holding hands. They smiled at her, not out of pity, but admiration. She felt radiant, not for how she looked, but for how she had finally stopped hiding. She returned home that night and lit candles for no reason. She took a long bath, played a record she hadn't heard since 1978, and sat naked on her bed afterward, just breathing. The moment Tom had seen her wasn't scandalous, had been sacred. A mirror turned inward. And in that quiet house in her 70s, Caroline finally realized. She had so much life left to live.